And away we go. All right, all right, all right. Picture this. You are hearing about an artist on, people talking about them, your friends. Uh, you're seeing videos on YouTube. You're seeing media reports, news reports, magazine covers. You understand that this artist is popping. And not only is the public on board, but critics are talking about this artist. There's a whole buzz surrounding them, and you just don't get it. You're like, I'm just not there with this. Like, I don't see it. You don't have to picture this because we've all experienced this at one point or another, even if we're even like remotely aware of what's happening in music and in media more generally. So it's something we've all lived through at one point or another. And in my case, I feel this way about Taylor Swift. But there's an additional layer to the experience with Taylor Swift because normally I'd be like, hey, I don't have any issue with her music being out there and being popular. It's not my cup of tea, but who cares? Right? However, in Taylor's case, there's this other ingredient or dimension where it seemed, at least to me, like the entire critical establishment collectively lost their minds and just decided this is an artist that we're not just going to talk about as if she's a pop superstar, but something much, 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 much more significant. And if you're not on board with this, then there must be something wrong with you. You must be misogynistic or missing the point, and you just don't get it, and that's a you problem. I want to get to the bottom of why that is and how the hell we got to that point with an artist like Taylor Swift. I'm Saby Reyes-Kulkarni, the apostate music journalist. Welcome to the 31st FeedbackDef live stream, a daily, 5 or 6 days a week, sometimes twice a day, conversation about music, meaning, memory, and life. Before I start, if you like what I'm laying down, please do hit the like, subscribe, and notification buttons. Also, I would urge you to comment. This is a monologue, but I love for it to be a dialogue. So please do weigh in the comment section. And lastly, please check out the other clips on the channel. And if you like what I'm saying here, you might also, or you are likely also to enjoy my Substack, feedbackdef.substack.com. You can support the channel a number of ways. I haven't turned on like the super chats donations feature yet. But for the time being, you can buy me a coffee or just straight up make a donation via Cash App. Okay. So as I mentioned before, earlier this week, actually, there was a New York Times magazine cover story titled The 30 Greatest Living American Songwriters. And even if you say that, it's hard not to chuckle out loud because it's like there's all these like arbitrary checkoff boxes. Well, they have to be alive and they have to be from the United States, and which right there severely constrains the scope of a list like that. I did a whole live stream on it, arguing that that whole premise has always been pointless and is especially so now in the age when outlets like the New York Times carry very little cultural sway. They don't move the needle for the public like they once did, where print publications and to a certain degree online publications, online music outlets once held enormous influence over how people understood music, what music they were exposed to, and they dictated the conversation. Definitely, online outlets did this as well. In the early 2000s, Pitchfork was a real engine for conversation just broadly. It was like constantly percolating among a certain demographic and with certain styles of music. I wrote for Pitchfork, not during that period. I wrote for them from, I think it was late 2014 through sometime in 2017. So it was like a 2.5 year blip in their history. And I don't know, I did about 100 reviews for them. And so I have some understanding of sort of how that world operates, but still very much felt like I was on the outside looking in. Like I very much felt like I was not privy to how they made decisions. All I like my the extent of my awareness of what I saw specifically was the editing process. So I would pitch review, or they would send a list out of like upcoming releases, which like a lot of these publications do. Like the editors at Pace do this, the editors at Pop Matters do this. It's like, hey, here's the upcoming slate of releases. If you got something else, pitch us and let us know what your thoughts are, like a brief summation of what your thoughts are, and let us know what score you are planning to assign this release. Which I thought that was interesting. like, hey, we want to know the rating system right off the bat, or we want to know what rating you would give this right off the bat. Pitchfork at the time, and they still do this, but they were notorious, specifically them, for having this decimal place. So it wasn't just a scale from 1 to 10. It was like you could get all the way from a 0.0 to a 10.0. And if you go on their site now, even though it's partially paywalled, it's like you'll see 7.3, 4.4, and let's see. If you go to the latest Taylor Swift album to be reissued, there it is, The Life of a Showgirl from 2025. It's a 5.9, which it's like, okay, what distinguishes a 5.9 from a 5.8 versus a straight 6? Your guess is as good as mine, and I wrote over 100 reviews for them. I remember noticing. So we would pitch our score. Like I would submit as a contributor, as a freelancer. I was not a staffer there, right? I would submit my copy with a score assigned to it. I've never liked the idea of grading music, but I sort of grudgingly, and then eventually not so grudgingly, just did it as a kind of shorthand to communicate with editors and eventually with readers quickly. Just being like, hey, this is sort of where I would drop this. This is on a scale of 1 to 10 or whatever. This is how I'm thinking about this album as a quick entry point for you, either the editor or you, the reader, to understand what I was like, more or less where I stood on the album. But I've never loved the idea. I think like to be like Olympic judges and like give a title card and be like, 7 point whatever. It just seems to require a lot of audacity. And like, it's like, well, are we school teachers here, like assigning grades to art? That doesn't sit well with me as a creative person, as someone who makes music, that I somehow get a ruler out and a red pen and I mark your work and then say A minus or B, straight B, or C plus or D, But again, as a kind of shorthand, quick way to communicate hey, this is how I feel about this music, fine. I'm fine with it. I don't lose any sleep over it. I think the whole thing is silly. I'm not there to be like your English teacher giving you a number grade on your essay, but fine. I write reviews. If you didn't already know, the way I approach reviews is I write them so you can get to what you would think about the music based on my description. And even though my opinion is in the middle there, it's like a cylinder. It's like a beam, right? You can walk around that beam to get to what you would think of the music. And my description of the music is should give you clues to that. So my description, as far as I'm concerned, is what's more important to the reader than my opinion on the actual music and which songs I do and don't respond to. Now, what I do often interrogate or challenge is an artist's thought process and their intentions. I just reviewed, I talked about this either yesterday or the day before. I talked about the new Thundercat album and here on my channel, and I reviewed it for Pop Matters, which I'm like looking forward now. I don't see it up yet. I think it's supposed to be up today, or I think it was supposed to be up yesterday, but it's not up yet. I definitely took issue with some of his decisions in terms of tone and what he did, in my view, to work against this incredibly affecting, beautiful, powerful, absorbing music that I thought was just lovely. And then he like did certain things to kind of like inject humor in a way that I felt was jarring and sort of emotionally at odds with the music. So I have no issue doing that. But again, you can read a review of mine and go, well, that doesn't matter to me, or it does. I've always tried to position my reviews as kind of a lantern or a guiding light so you can find your footing in what you would want to be curious about or what you would want to investigate about the music on your own, and then get to your own conclusions, or a guiding light to your own conclusions. Okay. So one thing I noticed early on, and even before I started writing for Pitchfork, every time I would read one of their reviews, it's like, well, wait a minute. What the writer is saying about the music doesn't match the score. Oftentimes I found that the scores were lower than what you would think the writer wanted to say or wanted to give it based on what they said. And indeed, I found out in that process, editors generally, especially there, but in general, seem, in my experience, to be reluctant to give something too high of a score. Like over a lot of the time, I have found that I am lobbying to give an album a higher score, and the editor is pushing back, saying, "Nah, let's slow your roll a little bit. Let's cut a point or two, or let's cut a point off there, and not like gush all over it." At Pitchfork, this seemed to me to be especially pronounced, and it's like, why is that? And it's strange because they never dictated. They never ever one time made me feel like, or gave me any inkling that they wanted me to, that they had a set idea of the way they wanted an album to be framed, or that they wanted an album to have a favorable review. They gave me total freedom to say what I wanted, which really surprised me because, at the time I started contributing for them, it was like they had this status as like the hipster Bible kind of, they were the lead dog in setting the tone for what was considered cool and what wasn't. And it was controversial. They ran a review of an artist named Travis Morrison, who is best known as the frontman of this Washington D.C. indie rock band named the Dismemberment Plan, who in the early 2000s or late 90s, actually, early 2000s, there was a buzz around them in the indie underground. And so Travis Morrison releases this solo album. I think it's called Traviston or something like that. And they gave it a 0.0 review. And instantly, his whole team, his management, his booking agent, his label, the crowds like disappeared from his shows. This was like an overnight, like public execution of a career. And that they had a lot of influence, and they were not apologetic about it. They didn't care that they could do that to an artist, and they reveled in that. It's like in the ability to just to determine whether somebody was viable or not. I remember the founder of Pitchfork, Ryan Schreiber, being quoted about that, saying, well, we have a responsibility, blah, blah, blah. And the thing is, when the site started in the late 90s, it was really irreverent. It was really like writers, they leaned into this sort of hot under the collar. They leaned into having personas, sometimes being almost delirious in the way they would write about music, and it had a lot of personality. It was really, really, really irreverent. And then along the way, at first they were very music snobby. They hitched their wagon to and showed their allegiance to a lot of underground music that was left of center or not very popular. And then they kind of thumbed their nose at popular culture and what was considered mainstream. Their whole identity was, we are bucking against the establishment. We're bucking against the mainstream. They would make snide remarks about certain, you weren't going to see a review of the new Eagles album on Pitchfork. That was a world that they were trying to take down in a way. That was the tone. That was the idea. And then as you get into message boards and online community, interaction in the early 2000s, the blogosphere is picking up steam. You see readers discussing their reviews a lot online, and a lot of people from that world, and even musicians who grew up at that time, discussing that they were discovering music because of Pitchfork. I mean, they were posting multiple reviews a day. This thing was just cranking content. And even if you go to their site now, you'll see whoever you are, a bunch of stuff you've never heard of. And even just seeing the graphics of their reviews page, you're like, oh, I've never heard of that person, never heard of that person. Let me check that out. So even if you don't read anything or click on anything, it still works as an engine of discovery. And I think that's something they always did very, very well and continue to do. But okay, so then they get more and more and more powerful. They sort of become the new establishment as print publications die off. And then at a certain point, this happened while I was contributing for them, they get bought out by Condé Nast, which owns Vanity Fair and GQ and really like high-end publications like that that are geared towards a very wealthy um, reader demographic. Like it was a strange it was a strange partnership because it's like, wow, this iconic institution representing underground DIY, like go get 'em kind of mentality, founded by a guy who's just writing music reviews just out of sheer passion. Well, not just sheer passion, but a desire to be a tastemaker for sure. Um, but just moxie, like I'm just going to do this. That becomes profitable, and then eventually they get bought out by this corporation, this corporate publisher that's totally sort of on the other end of the life experience spectrum. And when that happened, the freelance rates went up by a third. So like it went up by, well, I think they were paying something like $80 a review or something at the time, and then it went up to 120. So it went up by 50%. I was like, whoa. Just doing the math on all these reviews that are cranking. I'm like, man, there's a lot of money being poured into this thing. And I don't know when this happened, but somewhere along the way, critics started embracing pop music. This gets back to Taylor Swift. I'm getting back there. The so-called poptimism school of music criticism, where it was like, okay, we're not going to be snobs about this anymore, but in a nutshell, we're going to examine populist forms of music that are hitting with the masses, and we're going to talk about them with the same eye as if we're talking about high art, and in this really like academic tone. This has since spread. I don't know whether it even started with Pitchfork, but I mean, it's all over. You go to like the New York Times, anywhere, the New Yorker, NPR, even, they'll give pop music the same latitude that they would something that is, other music that is like on its face presenting as more highbrow. If you're talking about like, who would, I want to just name a jazz artist off the top of my head on Blue Note, like a Lionel Lueke album or an Emmanuel Wilkins album, like side by side with Katy Perry and Taylor Swift and Ariana Grande. Like there's an incongruity there that I don't think has ever been resolved. And so where I think the original crew of people that were on board with Pitchfork, like Ryan Schreiber and other writers, contributors to the site, wouldn't have been caught dead writing about pop music that's like, being played at the mall and in supermarkets. That's eventually what Pitchfork became, while also looking back into like, classic rock and 90s alternative, like mainstream rock in a much less snobby way, and then also maintaining one foot in the world of the obscure and, much less known underground stuff. And so, okay, so they expanded their range, which that's fine. But along with that, Taylor Swift is like the perfect example of how it's like they were looking for something important in music that I don't think lends itself to a very academic outlook. Like you have to ask yourself, like Taylor Swift's lyrics, where she's like, is it me or is it her? Or, like they, this isn't poetry here. This isn't like, there aren't layers of meaning in what she says. Like, her music connects with young girls for a reason. Not to disparage young girls as listener. My 8-year-old is one of those listeners, and if I listen to her talk about music, I think she's really thoughtful about it. I respect her taste and the things that attract her, but she's not quite aware that, Taylor Swift is I mean, she's aware that Taylor Swift is older, but it's like this adult woman is talking to a grade schooler on the same level. Like, her music is communicating with a grade schooler on the same level that this grade schooler is experiencing life. And so watching the entire herd, and I mean the entire herd of music critics, lose their minds over Taylor Swift and just go through all these like gyrations to see something there that wasn't there, I always found like puzzling or even disturbing. It was like, nope, this is somebody you must view as a serious artist, or you are misogynistic somehow. Like, it was like a gotcha kind of trap. It's like, don't you dare say anything about this person. You must not get it. And I was like, okay, look, like, just off the top of my head, like, I'll just throw out a few artists out there. Okay, there's Joni Mitchell. There's Michelle Ndegeocello, St. Vincent. That's just 3. I could go on and on and on against Suzanne Vega. Even a contemporary pop artist like Olivia Rodrigo, who my daughter also really likes, really loves, actually. I mean, Beyonce. There are so many artists, female artists, who are making work that you almost can't deny is deeper in its construction, in its meaning, in its layers than Taylor Swift. Again, I have no issue with her music. If I walk into like a supermarket and she's playing, I'm not like, oh my God, this stuff is so disgusting. But I wouldn't give it much of a second thought. And there's plenty of pop music I love. Plenty. But I don't put it all in the same category. Some of it, to me, I think I take 100% seriously as art. And some of it I just think is like shiny, kind of bubblegum, glossy, sugary stuff. Like, it's not very substantial. And there's a spectrum in between there. I think some people straddle both of those things. I think Taylor Swift, for all of her work ethic, like when I watch her performances, I'm like, God damn, she works hard. Like, that is a production. That is like a full-blown Broadway times 10 production that travels around, and I can see why it's so expensive. I'm like, hats off. Like, she is working. I'm not saying it's easy to be that, but the music itself and the level that it's communicating on just doesn't feel like there's that much there to write home about. And to watch adult women music critics invest it with so much meaning over these other artists, some of whom I've mentioned, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's just off the top of my head. I mean, even like Adele, Amy Winehouse, St. Vincent, I don't know if I mentioned her already. There's a lot going on there. And yeah, those artists get reviewed too, but I don't hear the same like wild-eyed fervor. Like, we must find meaning in the work of this, in Taylor Swift's music, in this music. Because you don't have to do that with the artists I've mentioned, because it's already there. You don't have to like double over or bend over backwards or tie yourself in knots or do all these mental gymnastics to find the substance. It's there already. Jenny Hval, who's a Norwegian artist, yeah, she gets reviewed a ton on these same platforms. I've been sent her records a lot, but it's like again, you don't have to push yourself and squint to see that there's something deep going on in her work. I could go on and on. I have a list of, I think it's 200 people that I made that I'm like, okay, if you're going to be like, oh, you don't like Taylor Swift, so, F you, like, how dare you? I mean, I know a publicist who would, this is just one person, okay, but it just goes to show the nerve that was being tapped. I know a publicist. I don't know her personally, but I mean, I've had online interaction. And this publicist would post like, I went on a date and the guy immediately went off on Taylor Swift. And I thought, oh, I'm not dating you, kind of a thing. It's like, wow, that's a lot to stake on this one artist. Like, why does this woman represent so much to you? And again, if you look at her lyrics, I mean, they're so nakedly, unabashedly undeveloped. There's like this arrested adolescence, not even adolescence. I honestly think my 8-year-old is already past where some of Taylor Swift's lyrics are. It's like a frozen, juvenile, childlike naivete that this music is like, no, we're staying here. Even though she's talking about boyfriend, breaking up with this one, it doesn't seem to be weighed down by any of the grit or the dirt or the yuckiness, like the post relationship, like bloating, like the emotional bloating that real relationships cause you. The interpersonal indigestion that you get. It's almost like when I hear her lyrics, I get the sense of like an adolescent doodling in her notebook, imagining what love is like the way she's seen it in the movies, like very sort of airy and fluffy and starry-eyed, looking at love and looking at relationships. There really isn't much substance there at all. There's no sense of like what actually happens when we're in relationships and we're rubbing elbows with somebody, and our like damaged inner child is being triggered and like setting off someone else's damaged inner child who's being triggered, and all of our apprehensions and inadequacies and all the things that we didn't, all of the emotional sustenance we did not get and we're searching for through relationships in vain. And even just the day-to-day sort of mundane hassle of fitting your life with someone else's, even under the best of circumstances, even in relationships where there's a lot of harmony and a lot of deep, profound bonding, like where there is truly a bond between two people and truly a love that keeps them together and keeps them kind of, like I said, harmonizing on this third octave where each one of them is a note, but then there's this other third note and the relationship itself becomes a living thing that is greater than the two individuals that are in it. Even those relationships on day to day, it's like, oh, each person has to go at the tempo of the other person, and it can kind of start to feel like a three-legged race. Like your whole life, you might be feeling like I'm in a three-legged race with this person that I feel wonderfully about being in relationship with. Even those relationships have the kind of muck and the mire of like, the three-legged race. I'll give you the simplest, most basic example. And this is a big deal. Like for anybody who's listening who has been in a relationship and has experienced this sounds funny and trivial on paper, but man, oh man, this can wreak havoc. Just real simple. The temperature of the room that each person is comfortable with in the bedroom. So, number of blankets, air conditioning versus heat, like how cold or warm it is in the room. That that may seem like just it's just one little logistical thing. It's not even that big of a deal. We can work that out. That's before you even get to values and how you raise children, like what your views on that are, and your goals and your intentions, religious and spiritual outlooks, political differences, and then of course the other bugaboo, taste in music and in films and so on and so forth. Like that is just one that doesn't even get into that territory, and already you can have a potential like stick of dynamite in your relationship. I don't get any of this from Taylor Swift's music. All I hear is this arrested adolescent longing that isn't even very well defined. And so when I hear music critics who are capable of going deep into the experience of music, and then they all turn and look at Taylor Swift as the figure that they've all decided they're going to champion, and they're going to turn into a referendum on what womanhood in the modern age means. I'm like, what the fuck are we doing here? You could have picked seriously, you could have thrown a dart in the air and landed on somebody who represents the wholeness of the human experience much more. I mean, again, Olivia Rodrigo, who's barely out of high school, represents the full three-dimensionalness of being a human being much more so than Taylor Swift does. And I'm not saying that because Olivia Rodrigo is cute and because she says the word fuck a lot. Because beyond her, dropping F-bombs left and right, she doesn't actually lead first with sexualization. She's not trying to be this two-dimensional sex kitten. She's actually delving into the frustration and the aftermath and the tangle of conflicted feelings that ensue before, during, and after relationships. She's much more honest about it. Like you're getting a much more honest representation, even though it's a young person's, it's coming from the perspective of a young person. It's like, all right, why not her? Why did the establishment point its arrow and say, this is the one we have ordained as a symbol of what it means to be a woman now? Because I don't hear any woman there. None. I think Taylor Swift still sounds like a child in this very, very it's like inescapable just listening to her talk. It's like I find myself asking, what is the range of your experience? Like what have you actually experienced? I like, you seem like a cutout, like almost like a robot that's just programmed to say certain things. And it's like, what's actually in there? What are your feelings? What did you actually do? Because you've been on track to be famous since you were a kid. Like she was set up by her parents to be a country music star. And then she shifted out of that and then went into pop. Okay, I'm not even going to fault her for that. But I remember once in the recording studio that I worked at in the early 2000s, there was a band that came in there with their dad, and there were these three boys. The oldest one couldn't have been more than 11 years old. And their dad, it was clearly one of those situations where like the dad was really the driving force behind them being in the, in this band. And they were singing this tune where the chorus was, "Hey mama," um, something about "Hey mama." Man, I wish I remember the words. It was a lyric I would have expected from an adult singer-songwriter, like, "Hey mama, leave your shoes out and let me know if the lovin's going on," or something like that. And I instantly felt uncomfortable. First of all, the kid seemed miserable. The kid who was singing, I mean, you put a kid through like 25 takes in the same afternoon. Poor kid, right? It's not it's not a good thing to do to a child. And really, actually, you can do that too much to a grown-up band too, to an adult band, where you can say, "Oh, do another one, do another one, do another one, do another one," and they're like, "Oh my god, get me the fuck out of here!" And they look like they want to jump out of their skin and smash through the studio wall and just run free, you know? Like, so you can see that in adult musicians. But this poor kid, like, they were driving him pretty hard, and past the point where clearly he was uncomfortable. And I wanted to fucking scream. Like, it really, really, really bothered me. I'm like, first of all, he's singing a lyric. He has no idea what he's even saying. Singing a lyric about a lover and about a relationship that an adult man would have written the song, who's had those experiences to sing about. And this poor kid is like a marionette singing this song, being put through the paces. And I could tell, it's like you see this a lot, but like when parents are pinning their hopes onto their kids, it's a recipe for disaster. You've got to be able to delineate it and say, no, 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 no. I'm not going to project. I'm not going to saddle my kids with what I would have wanted for me. You have to be very clear and disciplined. And I guess it's easy for me to say now, right? Because I'm not in a situation where my kid is doing something that's adjacent to my skill set or to my passions, to the things I love, where it might lend itself to me, quote unquote, supporting her or getting behind her career. Honestly, I don't think I have any place there at all. I would be very suspect of my own intentions because there's a voice that says, this is not your fucking place. It's not your life. Like, back the fuck off. Let her determine her own path. Don't put all your baggage onto her and decide what you think she has to do and how she has to pursue it. Again, easy for me to say because right now, at least, it doesn't appear to be going down a musical path. But, there are certain things we like to do together. We like to make visual designs. And I could see a situation where, oh, wow, we're kind of working side by side. And then I would have to pull myself to the side and be like, okay, dude, you have to be clear and you have to not muscle in on what is not yours. And when I see parents pushing their kids into something, I just think it's not a good thing to do at all. At the same time, if you're a parent and you have certain skills and you could be like a manager or something, why not do it? There's another example. There's a band out of New Zealand, a heavy metal band named, oh my God, I can't believe I can't remember their name. Oh my God. It'll come to me. They're a New Zealand metal band. They sing in Maori. I've done one of their bios. I've reviewed one. Alien Weaponry is what they're called. And they're named after the movie District 9. That was what was tripping me up because I was like, it's from District 9. Anyway, Alien Weaponry. they were managed by their dad for a long time, but even he was like, yeah, I want to let them sort of go have their own experiences now. And, I thought in that case, he did a really, really great job of not owning their future, but being a supporting, he was like a wheel or like a mule or like he was like a beast of burden almost, which is what you should do for your kids, right? But it wasn't like, this is my dream. He was supporting their dream. It's a fine line, sure. So with Taylor Swift, she was thrust into this as someone at an early enough stage in her life that she didn't have her own experience. Then she gets like mega famous and is still singing from the same childlike perspective that she started out with. And, I just showed one review, the most recent one from Pitchfork, but holy moly, there's review after review, there's podcast after podcast where these people who are talking about music in these very erudite terms are applying those terms to Taylor Swift. And it's so funny because like people who are from like the New York Times, the New Yorker world, like that upper class mentality, it comes across as so stilted and awkward. They're like you can tell they're like, oh, now we're going to talk about the music that the people love. Yes, let's talk about that. But we still sound like we're in some like, some like old library at Yale or something. It's like, okay, do you even understand the people on whose behalf you're speaking? I'm talking about the audiences. Do you even know who that is? Do you think you're part of that? And you don't sound like it. There is a critic. She is one of the lead critics at the New Yorker. Her name is Amanda Petrusich. And on one of these podcasts, she said, I went to the Taylor Swift show and I felt like she was singing directly to me. And I was like, whoa. And I'm listening and I'm like, this didn't alarm you? This should like have you going, wait, whoa, that's fucked up. Because I remember when I heard something like that, I know the manager of a food co-op, sort of, grocery store here in town. And he lived in the Bay Area. And he told me when he was younger, he would listen to Jim Jones, the infamous cult leader, the guy who went to Guyana and had all those people take Kool-Aid to kill themselves, including a bunch of children. And I laugh because there's an album cover. There's a metal band called Nail Bomb that named their album "How to Commit Commercial Suicide," and they put pictures from all the dead bodies at Guyana on the cover, which I thought it was really well done. Actually, a lot of shit like that I think is tasteless, but I thought that was very well played, and it made me laugh every time. But the actual, like, I've seen a documentary on Jim Jones, and it's really chilling because when he started as a preacher and he first started to gain, a larger following, he was preaching like a racially inclusive message. Like there are people from all these different ethnic groups. Like he was like engaging in racial unity in his congregation. And the message seemed so positive. And I've watched footage of his congregants, his followers, and they seemed very bright, like filled with this like brightness. So this food co-op manager that I know here in town, he told me, he said, man, I would listen to his radio broadcasts, and it was like he was speaking directly at me. And he's like, wow, man, it was scary, it was chilling. Yeah, because it should be. like when you feel that, your instincts your animal instincts should go, danger, 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 danger. What's going on here? Why is this person accessing that part of me? How did they get past my defenses? Why is it that some part of me is responding to them, that my system is saying, they're speaking to me, even in an arena full of people? Amanda Petrusich did not question this at all. In fact, she spoke about it as if it was a good thing. And I've wondered sometimes, I'm like, what's behind this? Is there some sort of spell that Taylor Swift is casting on all these critics and on her followers too, on her audience? Now you can take that literally or not. I don't know what's in the music. I mean, I've seen theories about occult symbology. I think it's very difficult to deny that there is rampant occult symbology in pop music. Just look at do a Google search and, knock yourself out. And I'm not poo-pooing it, right? But I also wonder whether music doesn't even really need much extra um, intention or quote unquote spellcraft behind it, because music is so powerful unto itself that it reaches a part of us that you don't need to put any extra spin on the ball. It's already gonna work like a spell on you, regardless whether you put fucking pentagrams and, one closed eye symbol and, satanic Luciferian Baphomet and any of that stuff. And it like, maybe music is an occult device on its own, and we dress it up with occult symbols as a way of catching up to the fact that we know it already works just fine on its own. Maybe. You can go down, you can pursue that. I'm not dismissing it. I'm not saying there isn't something funky going on, because the adulation, like the blank eyed, like, oh my God, Taylor Swift is amazing, does make me feel suspicious. But at the same time, I'm going to take both with a grain of salt. I'm going to take the the swirl of like, oh, there's something in that music. There's some sort of witchcraft, there's some demonic energy in that music. Somebody's doing that to us. I'm not dismissing it. I'm going to take it with a grain of salt. I'm also going to take everything that the critics are saying about her with a grain of salt, but maybe she's just charismatic, in spite of the fact that the music for me doesn't feel very powerful. Maybe there is some inherent charisma there. And I know that there might be, because there's a remake of the film. There's an animated version of the film The Lorax. So the famous Dr. Seuss story book. And there's an animated version that I've watched with my daughter a ton, and we love it. And the female lead, unbeknownst to me, is voiced by Taylor Swift. And I remember having a response to the voice of that character going, wow, she's got a really compelling voice, whoever this actress is. And it's like, okay, there must be some charisma that even I am responding to, in spite of how I feel about the music. Maybe that's all that there is. Maybe when you are an artist and you have charisma, and then you pair that with sound, maybe you are casting a spell, in a sense, over the masses. And maybe it doesn't require any of this extra intervention from these other forces. I have no idea. I like to think that both layers are possible. I like to think it is possible that there are what we would consider to be paranormal forces of nature that people can marshal even though that's scary. And I like to think that that is a part of our world, that the power of consciousness is so great and so vast that there's a kind of constant energetic psychic warfare going on between the individual and institutions that are heavily armed against us, but we are also heavily armed because we're the ones who determine what those institutions are. And that music somehow is involved in it. I am not averse to conspiracies, but I also take them with a grain of salt. And I also like to look at music on another layer, stripped of all that, where it's just, where it's just the music, where that's all I'm thinking about. And that's all I'm engaging on its own merits. I take both with a grain of salt. I don't like it when people are like, oh my God, that's crazy. Taylor Swift can't put a spell in her songs. What are you, crazy? I take that with a grain of salt, but I also take it with a grain of salt when people are like, oh my God, she's definitely a witch of some kind. I don't know. I'm actually not all that interested in finding the answer. What I'm interested in is the questions. Is how did we get to a place where so many critics speak of her as if she were this unassailable object when her music does not line up with everything that they project onto it and everything they ascribe to her artistry? If you were to ask me, this is just my opinion, she has no business whatsoever on the 30 greatest American songwriters, anything. Like, I don't look at her as a songwriter or think that she has a place in the pantheon of what we would consider the greats. But so what? Like, so what if I don't think that? I just find it suspect that critics fall all over themselves to include someone like that. And there seems to be a socio-political agenda in her inclusion. Because, I mean, put her side by side. Lucinda Williams was on one of those covers because the New York Times Magazine, they had like alternate versions of the cover with like a bunch of different people. So like Jay-Z was on one, Taylor Swift was on one, Lucinda Williams. It's like, come on, man. Like, you know, right off the bat, who is more substantial. It would be like saying that, I guess it would be like putting like I don't know, like a Stephen King in the same breath as a Shakespeare. And I'm a strong advocate for there being no objective truths about art. And I don't think people should be like, this is clearly better than that. But I mean, it would be hard to argue that Stephen King, that there was as much craft in the work of Stephen King, for example. Or you know what, let me, maybe not, that's a bad example. Like a romance novelist. It would be hard to argue that there was as much craft in a romance novelist as there was in Shakespeare. Then again, Shakespeare was the trash entertainment of its day, and that's all he was aspiring to be. So, I mean, you can kind of spin yourself around with this. I certainly make a distinction between what I consider high art and low art, but the dichotomy between highbrow and lowbrow is arbitrary. There is, in fact, an awesome book named Highbrow, Lowbrow, which I'll look up and I will try to show you right now. And I read this book. This was recommended to me by a former girlfriend of mine. Thank goodness she did, because she was like, the way you talk about pop music as if it's just kind of disposable junk. She goes, you might want to reconsider that and check this book out. Highbrow, Lowbrow book. Yes, here it is, by Lawrence W. Levine. So I will, let's see, I'll try to put this tab. Let's see if I can do this. I'll try to put this tab here so you can see it. So in this book, I learned that, yeah, there it is. I learned that in the 1800s in the United States, there were touring Shakespeare companies that would perform Shakespeare plays. And there were a bunch of them. They were sort of like the big rock show tours of their day. And even in an age where many Americans could not read, they were illiterate, these Shakespeare productions were very popular among the masses. Even like freed slaves would go see these Shakespeare productions. It was pop. And I was like, whoa, this blew my mind. So my old girlfriend there, she was right. My own personal distinctions between pop and art, where I would say Olivia Rodrigo is actual art. Taylor Swift is just Walmart plastic sugary candy. That's totally arbitrary. Jazz music, which is considered, in the contemporary mindset, about as highbrow as it gets. Like even the discussions around jazz, like reek of mothballs. Like you're looking at a museum exhibit, like a diorama in a museum that's surrounded by plastic. It's so preserved and handled with such care. Jazz music was popular entertainment of its time. Jazz music started in brothels in New Orleans. The word jazz means the smell of sex. It was considered low down whorehouse music. And now look at the way it's talked about. So look, all these critics, they might just be on the opposite side of a line that I have arbitrarily drawn that is true and like undeniable to me, but maybe it's just ridiculous. Maybe there is no distinction. I'm like, well, you're going to remove that distinction. You're going to remove my standards from my cold, dead hands. You're going to, we must have discernment in art. We must be able to distinguish between the real stuff and the bubble gum. Maybe all these critics are just not as hung up as I am. Maybe they're free to enjoy something. I suspect that is not the case. But of course, I'm going to suspect that because I'm looking at it through my own bias. I can't look at it through anybody else's eyeballs. So while I'm saying something in these critics is lying to them, they're lying to themselves, my own bias is lying to me. And I don't know. All I can say is it does seem strange to me that they all landed on this one artist and just seemed to decide, no, she's bulletproof. Like, not only can we not really challenge or interrogate what she's doing, but we must inflate what she's doing as if it is supremely important and tells us something about who we are. And again, they could be right and I could be wrong. But I do wonder whether this isn't somehow a generational thing. Now, a lot of the critics I'm talking about are older than this. But I think back to when I was in my early 20s in the 90s. I turned 20 in late 1992. And I think back to the music that I was pursuing and just that was out there in the culture. You have something like a 9 Inch Nails, which is really transgressive music. 9 Inch Nails created a legend around a fake snuff film around one of their releases. This is right before, or like a couple of years before, the Downward Spiral. They put out an EP named Broken, and they circulated this like fake snuff film with like gore and murder on it, and sent it to people like wrapped in like a paper bag or something. It's like, what the fuck? Like that, like that's going too far even for like someone of like even for me. I'm just like, I'm not cool with that. like why would you associate that with your music? And then in like, I don't remember what it was. I think it was like 2000. What year would this have been? There was a year where Trent Reznor, who became this like respectable figure wearing a suit, he was interviewed on Tavis Smiley on PBS, and just sounds very, very sober minded, very clear. He sounds very adult. Well, that same, you know, Grammy Award nominee who sounds very polite and Midwestern and respectable in these spaces like PBS and the Grammys. And I think he might have even been nominated for an Academy Award for the Ken Burns, his don't quote me on that, but there's an air of respectability about him now. Somewhere in there in that same time, he leaked the snuff film, the fake snuff film, online at Christmas time, and I'm like, what the fuck? Like, who does that? Like, that's fucked up. It's like, I don't associate Christmas with your gore fantasy trip. Like, who are you, dude? Like, what are you doing? But nevertheless, that aside, just so much of the music from that decade, it was delving into negativistic emotional states. A lot of music, not just Nine Inch Nails. I mean, the Downward Spiral is like a tour through the mindset of someone who is contemplating ending their own life. It's a little more complex than that, but it's in there. Sort of the emotional landscape of that album is a rumination on wanting to die at your own hand. Just think about the fact that Twin Peaks was on network television in the 90s. Yeah, it was on at 10 o'clock. It was past prime time. Twin Peaks, which opens with a murdered high school student, Laura Croft, I think her name was, the character. And in her autopsy, she's found with the semen of 3 different men in her vaginal canal. This is on network television. It's like, whoa. When I think back to that, I'm like, my God, we thought that was normal. I'm not even saying it shouldn't be on network television, right? I mean, the stuff we see on HBO and Hulu and all that is in the same zone now. I'm not saying it shouldn't. I'm just saying that at the time I took it for granted. Yeah, this is the thing. These are the things being talked about in music and film, and yeah, that's where we're at. I didn't question. I didn't go, oh my God. I knew older people were like, oh my God, but I had been conditioned that transgressiveness is art, that art is transgressive. You fast forward to now, and I'm like, man, like you could, the contrast could not be more glaring. It's like you could get whiplash thinking about what it was like being 20 years old in 1994. I was almost 22 that year. So I was 21 going on 22. And the art and music that was out there in the zeitgeist and now, and I wonder whether there isn't a need for safety, because in the 90s and to a large degree in the late 80s as well, there was a need to break barriers, to push the envelope. And yeah, there's still some art that does that, for sure. But it was almost like we needed to break out of the safety of our post 1950s wrapped in a post 1980s hangover. That the illusion needed to be shattered. We needed groups like NWA to be like, fuck you. We're going to show you, we're going to rub your nose in the violent, horrific underbelly that exists right under your surface. And in a lot of ways, David Lynch and Nine Inch Nails were doing the same thing. Drugs, sex, violence, transgressions of all sorts. You know, the movie Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. My God, that's, you know, like all that kind of stuff was just percolating. Even something like the movie Clerks, which is a comedy, right? Even that is like kind of unflinching in the way it almost violates the pieties that were still holdovers from previous generations. So we needed a lack of safety. We wanted to be thrill seekers, and we wanted to go off the edge of the cliff and see what was there. Obviously, the pendulum has swung, and there is a need for safety. That same generation that came up in the 90s, Gen X, I'm a Gen Xer, we have raised our kids, and we have been the most overbearingly overprotective parents probably in human history. We're the same generation that's like, yeah, you know, we were like left home alone as toddlers, and I was, you know, buying heroin by the age of 8. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but, you know, and we were left to roam and free range, and that is true. That is absolutely true. like that generation. Like, I just think back to my childhood, and my mom was a worrywart, and I still had tremendous latitude as far as where I could go by myself as a kid. Talk to anybody from that generation. They're like, yeah, our parents, like, Conan O'Brien summed this up perfectly fairly recently when he interviewed Bill Burr. He was talking to Bill Burr, and they both, you know, he was saying, oh, we both have daughters and we both became parents late. He goes, if you had asked either of my parents when I was growing up on any given day, where's Conan? They'd look at you like, I don't know. The fuck are you asking me for? Kind of a thing. They'd be like, oh, how would I know? For hours, all day long, kids would just be gone from the house. You couldn't keep a kid in the house, and it was punishment to keep them home because they wanted to be out of there. I was going to school by myself pretty much from the age of 9 onwards. And and then Conan and Bill Burr were like, and now I think about my daughters, and I'm like, I just couldn't, you know, I just can't picture being that lax, that laissez-faire, that hands off. And I see it all around me. So it's like, wait a minute. You talk to Gen Xers and they're like, yeah, man, our art was tough, man. It was like, you know, right? Because I'm feeling this. I'm like, why is there this gravitation towards Taylor Swift and these other pop stars who are ultimately very safe? They're very like vanilla. There's nothing really, you're not picking at the scab and seeing what's really there, squeezing the blood of the human condition out onto your own arm and going, that is the truth. You're not going to get that from that work. But wait, is Gen X to blame? Are we the ones who created these conditions where kids are terrified of leaving their houses or feel no incentive to do it? And thus they love music like Taylor Swift. So the plot thickens. It may not be the critics who are driving this. It may be the generation that created the conditions where someone like Taylor Swift could thrive. And again, I'm not taking anything away from the construction of her music, from like the way it's produced, from her work ethic. I watched those live clips and I'm like, damn. You know, I would probably go to that show if it wasn't like, you know, if it didn't cost like more than the GDP of a third world nation to get one ticket. Yeah, I would go. And I bet you I'd be into it. I could fucking get into it. Or I might be like, I feel like she's talking directly to me. um, and if I do that, then remind me, because that signals trouble. But I'm not taking anything away from her. Again, I would have no issue if she were just out there in sort of the marketplace of pop or of music more generally. I would not give her a second thought. I would not have any animus towards, she doesn't deserve to be. No, of course she does. It's just all of the meaning that I feel has been falsely ascribed to her work, and I wonder where that's coming from. But, ultimately, we're not going to have an answer, but I would be curious as to what your answer is. Please do let me know in the comments. Weigh in. Where do you stand on Taylor Swift, on, the critical response to her stature as a sort of sacred object or figure whose work is beyond reproach? Am I wrong about that? Could we go through the historical record and point to all sorts of reviews where they do challenge her? Am I giving you the wrong impression, even by saying that? Let me know in the comments. All right, I'm going to switch gears here since I have a little bit more time. This isn't meant to be like, oh, well, there's Taylor Swift on this side, and then there's this album I want to talk to you about now that are like on two opposite extremes, and one is, shit, and the other one is great. That's not how I mean to come across. I just want to point to something that was very popular in the early 90s that was considered pop music and would have occupied a place in the culture similar to the place Taylor Swift occupies now, although not entirely the same. So here we go. Let's go over here. Let's change this because we are clunky, and I'm just changing the tab that, oh, come on. This album was released in, oh boy, this is a commercial. This album was released in 1991. Sorry about that. I'm playing a stupid ass YouTube commercial. Okay, there we go. All right. This album was released in 1991, and it had hit singles. It was at the time the epitome of sort of soft, radio-friendly commercial pop music. It is one of my favorite albums of all time. And when I heard it crashing on the floor of someone in my college dorm, I think I had been asked to leave for a semester already at this point. And so I came to hang out in my college dorm because there was nowhere else to go. And I had a friend at the time named Jake, and we played music together for a while. But before that, I hung out. I stayed in the dorm too late. He let me crash on his floor, and he played this album as we fell asleep. And I've been a devoted fan ever since. The people who found this artist, a former music executive named Jill Sinclair, who was married to the producer Trevor Horn. Trevor Horn has worked with the likes of Yes. He is the producer behind the album 90125, so the song Owner of a Lonely Heart. That's his handiwork on the production end. He produced Frankie Goes to Hollywood, etc., etc. Let's see. Frankie Goes to Hollywood. I'm looking for other examples of music. I should know this off the top of my head. But Grace Jones and the Pet Shop Boys. He and his wife, Jill Sinclair, started a record label and like a management company, I believe, named ZTT Records with a music journalist named Paul Morley. So He's also worked with Bell and Sebastian, Leanne Rimes, Mike Oldfield, etc., etc. He's a very, very, very highly regarded music producer in the 80s and 90s commercial pop vein. Frankie Goes to Hollywood, relax, don't do it. When you want to do it, relax, which was like a gay club anthem in England at the time, and was a hit song here in the States as well. So Jill Sinclair discovers this singer who she is thinking could be the 90s answer to a Nat King Cole. So someone who is like instrumentally, like, you know, he plays music. Nat King Cole played piano before he became known as a singer, as a crooner, but also has this incredible voice and is very soulful and has this presence. And that singer is Seal. Trevor Horn gets on board and is like, wow, I hear what you're hearing. He produces this debut album. It's the first of several that Seal released under his own name, Seal. So he has like 3 self-titled albums, which is kind of ridiculous. But this album, to me, has this incredible blend of organic and synthetic instrumentation. So there's like a bunch of songs that are just kind of Seal strumming on a guitar or a piano with not much else going on, but there's these soft touches of electronic beats and beat construction all around it. And, you know, going into 1990, there were songs like Crazy, well, we're never going to survive unless we go a little crazy, which you know, I first heard that. I heard that before I heard the album in my friend's college dorm. And I just kind of, you know, I liked it, but I kind of relegated it as just like, yeah, that's like soft pop, you know, radio friendly. That's like soft commercial. It's like soft serve commercial pop dance electronic music. And there's a song called Killer. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, so those 2 songs I had heard. Solitary Brother. That's Killer. That's the song Killer. Those were 2 big hits. Then I heard the whole record and I hear these like, you know, these like acoustic strums that sound kind of like folk music, almost like a Joan Armatrading style or Tracy Chapman vein. But then you get these soft, billowy, like luscious expanses of production. The production on this is my favorite Trevor Horn production that I've heard. It is absolutely exquisite in my list of albums, like the albums that I've heard that the production knocks me out the most. This is definitely on that list. And it just strikes me that was considered pop music of its day. Now there was, you know, Spice Girls, and there was a lot of stuff. I mean, you know, Cyndi Lauper, who I also take seriously. There was a lot of stuff that I considered fluffy. There was Debbie Gibson. There's a lot of stuff out there that was like closer to the Taylor Swift lane, you know, more equivalent to that. But this came up for me today because I'm like, there seemed to be room in the culture for music that was pop, but also extremely well-made art. And this is always the album that comes to mind first for me when I think about that balance of things. Again, it's not quite an apples to apples comparison, and you can find art that's being made right now that sounds just as it's just as open in terms of speaking to people in an R&B, folk, pop, you know, electronic blend as this album did. There are lots of people doing stuff like this now. But in terms of having a foothold where someone could walk into a supermarket and hear a song like this, I just wonder how far we've come and whether we haven't taken a step backwards, even though there are probably thousands of artists, literally thousands across the globe, making music that I think is as rich and as deep as this. And I'm going to try something here that has not been working. I have all the settings on correctly. I'm going to try playing a little bit of the song and see if it works. First, well, actually, you know what? Let me take it out first. Let me stop screen. Let me share the screen. Blah, 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 blah. Yep. Also share audio. Okay. So look, I'm going to try to play a little bit of this and react to it. Hopefully this works. Just to give you an idea that maybe I'm not crazy for drawing a line between bubblegum and art. Sometimes they can overlap or they can touch. They can be very close or very adjacent. But I want to give you some sense of why it is that I can look at certain pop music and be like, yeah, that's pop music, but that's art. And this thing is just fluff. So I'm going to play you the beginning. Hopefully the audio comes through, and hopefully we don't get pinched for copyright.
You comb your hair in different light.
Wow.
Change the chair and seem to think that's alright. I understand you need a change. When you make that change, don't look to see I'm alright.
I should stop there, but one more.
Now I look at you in different light. A violent unicorn to me, that's alright. I understand you need a change. And when you make a change, the world will elevate you. And if I told you then that I could cry.
We'll stop there. You can see I have a horrible time remembering song lyrics. That is one of the most exquisite pieces of music I've ever heard. That song goes on for 8 minutes. Now, that wasn't a single. That wasn't released to radio. So, I mean, you know, it's not like they were like, yeah, this is going to be all over the radio. But when you take this album in its totality from start to finish, it's so much more than what could have even been conveyed just hearing the hit singles from it. You can't get a fair assessment of what this record and indeed what this artist was from just a song on the radio. And I don't really know what the point is of saying that, other than to say there's a lot of times where I would argue that what we collectively, the people we collectively remember as the the giants of music, the largest figures, the classics, the greats. Sometimes I think, you know, there's music that I totally see why it hits on a mass scale, but a lot of times it's like, well, should we trust our navigation system with that? Because there's lots of people you can point to who aren't in that discussion, who were never maybe known on a mass scale, who are just as deserving. And I'm not even saying Seal is one of those people, because he is known on a mass scale. He did have hits and sell millions of records. I don't know that he would be considered on par with like the biggest people, but he's definitely up there. He's definitely in the room somewhere for sure. So he's not even an overlooked artist. But we don't always get it right. And when we do, that's great. But this whole discussion of who's great and who's the greatest and blah, 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 there's no way to measure that because we don't know the people who we never heard. We don't know the people who came down the same chute but didn't make the same splash, who, for all intents and purposes, some of them might be interchangeable with some of the people that we think are great. And we have to be suspicious or we have to be cautious when critics are driving this discussion and telling us this person's important, this person's important, this person's important, this person's important. The one thing I'll say about Seal is that nobody ever, as far as I know, wrote about him as if he represented something larger than just his music. His music basically spoke for itself. There wasn't this like race to amplify or put a filter on the lens that we were understanding his music through. It could just stand on its own. And when I hear that and what it does, how much that album lights me up, especially that song and many others on that album, but just the whole thing as a work of art, I'm like, God damn, somebody made this. What a miracle. What an amazing miracle that this was made and somehow captured on tape in this way, and it made it through the music industry system and landed at my doorstep, and I was able to hear it. I was able to go out and buy it, and my friend was able to play it for me while I was crashing on the floor of his college dorm after getting kicked out of school the first time. How miraculous that is. And that there isn't this extra baggage being put on it. Maybe I'm putting baggage on it myself. But there isn't all this extra baggage. It's just the art and your experience. And oh, by the way, this was popular. This was mass consumed entertainment. He had a song in the Batman movie. Not from this record, but you know, that's how it all shook out at the time. Maybe critics straining so hard to put meaning, you know, to dictate the meaning of Taylor Swift's work has to do with the fact that we can all sense that these experiences are slipping through our fingers, that without the mass media consumption avenues that we once all shared, maybe we have to kind of fight for certain things to be heard, although that doesn't really make sense because Taylor Swift's concert tours gross more money than God. Like, even in a fractured media consumption landscape, she is towering above everybody else, like, you know, Godzilla stacked 10 times high. I mean, she's number one with a bullet. Like, nobody can touch her, you know what I mean? In terms of her reach and her impact. But maybe what the critics are responding to, it doesn't so much have to do with her, so much as feeling like we're all losing the grip on something. We're all losing meaning through music in one way, shape, or form. And that should have us all uncomfortable. And if that's what's motivating them, then I can understand it. I don't know. I'm just kind of spitballing here. But if you have not heard this first Seal album, if all you've ever heard is Kiss from a Rose, which is a super popular single from the album after this, listen to this album, listen to the way it's produced, listen to what a refreshing blend of modern 90s style or late 80s style R&B with electronic music, with, again, a folky, almost jazz-ish, jazz-leaning touch because there's piano on here too. And this incredible pop vocal presence in Seal, and the production, all of it. I mean, this is art, and sometimes art is pop, and sometimes pop is art. And wherever you draw the line, sometimes everything converges beautifully and there's a harmony there, and there's no need to kind of be like, well, why should this be popular and why is everybody talking about it, blah blah blah. Sometimes it falls into place in spite of itself. So those are my thoughts on that. Again, if you like what I'm laying down, please do weigh in the comments, hit the like, subscribe, notification buttons, check out the other content on the channel. I'm going to switch gears completely off of music and just tell you something that happened to me the other day that has nothing to do with any of this. I was walking past a playground that I used to take my daughter to when she was like 2 and 3 and 4 and, you know, in that age range. There were several. There were quite a few playgrounds within walking distance. She used to have a little balance bike, which I remember when her mom got her the balance bike, I thought, oh, no kid is going to want to use that for very long. They're going to get bored of it. No, my daughter used this balance bike for years. It's, you know, if you don't know what a balance bike is, it doesn't have pedals. You pedal with your feet on the ground, like the kid pedals and they move themselves along. And if they get enough momentum, they can balance on the bike. And it's been said now that kids will learn how to ride an actual bike quicker if they use a balance bike first than if they use training wheels, because training wheels make it possible for you to lean on the training wheels, and thus you don't have, you don't learn to balance. So I thought, oh, you know, no kid, first of all, kid's going to get bored. That doesn't look like fun. And it's going to feel too difficult to go any kind of real distance on that, because the kid is having to constantly do this with their feet, paddle along like a duck. My daughter would go 3 miles. Like we'd go 1.5 miles to one playground and then to one of the playgrounds we liked or she liked. And then we'd go 1.5 miles back in an afternoon. So anyway, I walked by this playground and I was struck because I looked over to it and I had a memory. It's almost like I saw an earlier version of my daughter and me standing there. I didn't actually see it, but I could look and the memory played. And it was like I was watching us. I was watching her climbing and watching me being with her. And I was very surprised that I felt proud of that dad. I felt proud of who I was in that moment. And I felt this surge of positivity and encouragement and like, wow, you were that dad. This took me totally by surprise. This is the exact opposite of what I would have expected. Because when I think back to those times with her, I have a lot of unease that's percolating up here and here. Like it's, you know, just as much in my heart as it is in my head. A lot of unease and a lot of even shame and just kind of like like I'll just kind of be like like slumped, looking at the limited resources I had, both materially and emotionally. And I feel this deep sadness for her, like on her behalf, like that I did not have more to work with. So where the hell was this feeling of like, oh, wow, like I almost stood up like in appreciation for the job I was doing at the time. Where the hell did that come from? I'll try and explain and leave you with how I think this might relate to you. Sometimes we're doing a better job than we know and than we could ever know. And sometimes the job we're doing, and I'm getting a little choked up even thinking about this in this, thinking about parenting. Sometimes the tools we have are enough in spite of it all. I don't necessarily think that feeling came from me. Well, I don't think it didn't come from me. I feel like I was able to have a moment of perspective as if I could step outside of myself and just look at it soberly and be like, no, that was enough. Because I am constantly looking at parenting as something to improve. I feel right out of the gate that it's something that I don't care who you are, but I especially felt like ill-equipped for the task, like very much at a deficit in terms of I'm starting the race, you know, 500 meters behind, and there's a ton of stuff. Plus, I only have one kid, so I was a new parent, and you really like are starting with like no basis for experience. And I had a dinky little apartment. She would get dropped off, a cramped apartment that was messy. And when I think about being in that apartment with her, I feel so sad for her. Like, oh, wow, this is what you were being provided with. Now, we had a lovely time. And I would set up our little films and I would set her up and we would watch movies together and I would take her to playgrounds, and I just feel so grateful that I was able to re-experience that for a moment and see past all of my apprehensions and all of my regrets and all of the weight of um, all my remorse, and just see those memories for the joyful, happy time they were. And recently, I was with my daughter and her baby brother, who is kind of like my stepson. He's not my son. So my daughter's mom is married. She and her husband have a son who's younger than my daughter, and the three of us do a lot of stuff together. And we have like a weekly movie night that we do, and it's just wonderful. And I see my daughter's baby brother all the time. Sort of day in, day out, I see him. And there are still, when you choose this path, when you're like, when you decide like, look, I'm not going to go the conventional route. I'm going to bet on myself and do something in the arts with the abilities that I have that are inherent to me. And you're like, I'm sticking this out. You put yourself at a disadvantage. I mean, you back yourself into a corner financially, and it like creates a lot of problems for you to be functional as just a person, much less a parent. But I was with the kids and their dog the other day, and it was like, in spite of everything that's not part of this picture, in spite of the fact that I can look at this as a puzzle with certain key pieces or even entire groups of pieces missing from the picture, we're doing it. We're living that life that I envisioned when we're doing activities together, and it's lovely, and I'm providing parental guidance for not one but two kids in whatever way that I can, in whatever way that's missing. It's like, that's it. There really is nowhere else to go from there. You can fill in certain components, but the basic puzzle, the basic picture, the puzzle pieces all add up. Anyway, it's me, these two kids, the dog, and their other two parental figures paddling downstream. And that feels wonderful. Maybe that had something to do with, because I wasn't quite there yet. I hadn't quite arrived at that sensation, like, oh wow, we're pretty much there. Yeah, there are limitations for sure. There's definitely shortcomings for sure. I read a written piece once about touring. I think it was a Musician magazine, when Musician magazine was actually still a print publication. And it was like a guide to touring, or a guide for aspiring touring musicians. And one of the musicians described touring as a mistake-driven environment. I thought that was so perfect. In other words, it's a task that you're in where you are perpetually monitoring all of the things, all the mistakes you're making. And you're constantly, like, there's an eye, like you are turned towards evaluating every way that you fell short of the goal every day. and I guess that's even maybe the more direct way of interpreting the quote was, it's an environment where you're going to be making mistakes left, right, and center. Any musician will tell you, and I'm talking about professional musician, orchestra players, classical music teachers, touring, gigging musicians, they'll say, like, they can count on two hands, maybe, the number of gigs they played that they felt were 100% perfect, or even 100% that they were 100% happy with. So you're engaged in a task where your mistakes are constantly an issue, and you have to find some way to be satisfied anyway and keep going. This is the very definition of parenthood. If you expected going into parenthood that you were going to feel, I don't know, even 40 fucking percent of the time like you know what the fuck you're doing. So, but I relish the learning part of it. I relish the constant opportunity for self-reinvention. Even though I do beat myself up, there are certain mistakes I've made where I'm just like, oh my God, like, I don't think I'll ever get over them, right? But I feel like when I walked past that playground, maybe not being quite consciously aware, but already feeling like I had already come so far from the days when I would take her to those playgrounds, maybe it sort of instantly kind of put it all in perspective for me, and I was able to tolerate and look upon the parent who I was, limited as I was, with appreciation and affection and like encouragement, like, yeah, you go. Maybe that was what happened. And maybe there have been things along the way since then, or maybe even through the adversity of making those mistakes and hitting this kind of rock bottom, like, man, am I even suited for this at all? Am I even serving any kind of fucking useful purpose at all? Like, can I even get past, like, the starting gate in terms of being able to do this? Can I even get to level 1, much less get to level 2? Maybe all of that sharpens who we are in any capacity, anything that we're doing. Like, I don't love the intro to this live stream. I thought I kind of fucked it up, to be honest. I'm able to just be like, oh, okay. If you can get to 75% of the goal and be 100%, well, what I always say is, if I play a gig or I do a live stream, I'm 100% happy as long as I can get 75% to where I wanted to get to. If, like, the performance was 75% of the way there, I'm 100% happy with that. Parenting, that's much more difficult, though, because there's so much more at stake. You can see in real time your mistakes having an impact that will reverberate for the rest of this kid's life. And you can see your mistakes being sort of trapped in your own, or not trapped, but your own repeating patterns that you're making progress on maybe, but it's slow. It's like turning like an aircraft carrier, like, turning it slowly. You can't just be like, whoop, or doing a 10-point K turn with like a giant tractor, right? All of your own tendencies, they require time and energy and nurturing to steer you on the right track. But meanwhile, your mistakes are having an impact. Maybe it's through those mistakes that the awareness is being born to the point where you can look back at where you were and send a message to your past self and be like, it's okay. You're okay. You're on the right track. I don't know. I just wanted to share that with you. I don't know if that's the case, but I wanted to impress upon you that maybe whatever you're doing is enough, even if on the face of it, it doesn't look like it. Maybe you're getting a lot further than you think you are, and that you have any way of knowing right now. And that indeed is something I think to live for. On the hope that, hey, we're not so incorrigible after all. We can grow, and in fact are growing sometimes even when we don't even notice it. So that's all I got for you. Once again, please do hit the like, subscribe, and notification buttons if you like what I'm laying down. Please do engage in the comments. I love to hear from you. And check out other content on the channel as well as my Substack. Other than that, for FeedbackDef, I am Saby Reyes-Kulkarni, the apostate music journalist. Thanks for hanging with me. Happy Friday. Over and out. Not sure if I'm doing a Mother's Day live stream yet. I probably should, but I'm not sure. In any case, I'll see you on the flip side.